What's up guys, my name is Lauren and welcome back to my channel. In a video I posted recently, I shared with you guys that we are working on investing for retirement, and I gave you an update as to where we are in that process to financial independence or FIRE, financial independence, retire early. And in that video I did share with you our minimum retirement goal is $5 million, but our ideal retirement number is $10 million. So I thought it might be interesting to walk through those numbers with you and explain how we got there. Because these were not numbers that we just pulled out of thin air. My husband and I actually sat down and had a conversation where we talked through specific factors that led us to these numbers. So I'm going to let you in on that conversation and tell you how we got to those numbers. Now, this is not any sort of official process. This is just the way my brain works and the way I like to think about it. But if you like this and want to be able to plug your own numbers into our process, maybe I'll add like a worksheet to my retirement toolkit. A lot of you purchased the retirement toolkit after watching my last video. So if you like this process, comment, let me know. If you want me to add this to the retirement toolkit, I'll add a worksheet in there. If you already purchased it, you'll be able to get this update as part of your previous purchase. You won't have to purchase it again. So just let me know if you want me to add in that worksheet if you think it would be helpful. Okay, so first of all, my husband and I started out with looking at our current expenses. Because we budget every single dollar and we do an annual budget, this was really easy for us to figure out because I just pulled up my budget dashboard and looked at our annual expenses and was able to find a number right away. Now, I did make a couple adjustments to our annual expenses before we came up with our retirement expenses number. So first of all, what we did is we removed any contribution to investing and any debt payment, including our mortgage. So right now we're investing every single month. We are paying off my husband's student loan and we are paying towards our mortgage every single month. So I took all of those expenses out of our annual budget because at the time we retire, we're not going to be investing anymore. We'll just be drawing on our investments and hopefully we'll be debt free by that point. We're about 30 years away from traditional retirement, so as long as we pay our mortgage payment every month on time and don't like refinance and start it over too many times, we should have our house paid off by the time we hit traditional retirement age by just paying our normal payment. But I'm hoping once we hit like late 40s, early 50s, we'll be able to have enough room in our budget that we can throw extra to that mortgage and pay it off early so we can actually hit that early retirement. But either way, we took those out of our budget first of all. The next thing I did was I looked through our expenses and saw if any should be adjusted based on the fact that our children will be adults at that point and probably not living with us or being supported by us on like a monthly basis. And so I adjusted our groceries and a couple other little things based on that. After I made those adjustments, I got to our expected retirement expense amount of $72,000. Now, one quick calculation that people do in the FIRE movement is once you hit 25 times your annual expenses, you've reached FIRE. So if you take $72,000 and multiply that by 25, you get 1.8 million. And I told you guys our retirement number is 5 million. Well, 1.8 million is how much we would need to retire with that amount of expenses today. That doesn't take into account what things will cost in the future. So because we are not like within a couple of years of retirement currently on our trajectory, unless something drastically changes and that gets majorly accelerated, we are decades away from retirement, not years away. So I did something else for our next step to calculate our FIRE number. I went online to an inflation calculator. I'll put on the screen the one that I used, and I put in our number of 72,000, and I got an estimation of what the equivalent of $72,000 will be 30 years from now. Because as we know, as time goes on, our dollars don't stretch as far. We've experienced this, especially in the past few years with inflation, that it just costs more to buy eggs and milk and buy a house and pay your utilities. Like all these things have gone up significantly. So this calculator allowed me to estimate, of course this is all estimates, this is all theoretical, but estimate what the equivalent of $72,000 will be in the future when we hit retirement age. And so the number it came up with was around 200,000. So our new inflation adjusted annual expense amount at retirement is 200,000. So where did I go from there? Next, I did apply the 4% rule. So you may have heard of the 4% rule or maybe not, but I'll give you a quick explanation. The 4% rule is just a simple shorthand way to calculate how much you can draw on your investments in retirement and never run out of money over the course of a normal retirement. This rule was created by a guy named William Bengen back, I think in the 90s, and he did a study called the Trinity study. It's very famous and well known, especially in the fire community. People talk about it all the time. And he ran a bunch of calculations that ultimately said that you can draw on up to 4% of your retirement assets and you're almost guaranteed to never run out of money. Now, he was talking about a traditional retirement of 30 years or less. He wasn't talking about retiring early like the fire community is, where you're retiring in like your 30s or 40s and have a retirement of 60 years or something. So some people like to be more conservative than 4% and say 3.5% or 3%. But because we're currently on track to retire more in the traditional retirement age range, I did apply the 4% rule. So if you take 200,000 and you divide by 4%, 0.04, you guessed it, $5 million. So that's how we got to our minimum retirement goal of $5 million, which is taking into account adjustments for inflation, adjustments for the fact that we'll be hopefully debt-free at that point, including our mortgage, which is taking into account the fact that our kids won't be living in our home and eating our groceries on a daily basis. So that is how we got to our minimum $5 million number. From there, we talked about our kids and what we would want to be able to do for them. So we came up with the number of $1 million per child. So we would like to have at retirement at least $1 million to give to each of our children while we're still alive. And that may seem like a huge number to you, but again, we're adjusting these numbers for inflation. So if you adjust down to today's dollars, that's the equivalent of giving them each $375,000. So here's how we came up with that number. So first of all, we have a goal of at least $150,000 per child to be able to contribute to educational expenses. So whether that be college, living expenses during college, graduate school, living expenses during graduate school, basically any expenses that could be covered by student loans, we hope to be able to cover those for them, or at least a large portion of those for them, by having at least $150,000 for each of our children to put towards educational expenses. Currently, we are doing that through 529 plans. We are not contributing ourselves into their 529s right now, but we plan to start that in the next couple years as they enter like school age. And the great thing about 529s that's changed in recent years is now if they don't use that money for educational expenses, we can actually roll it over into a Roth IRA over time for them. There's definitely like limits on this and different restrictions and caps and things, so it's not just like so simple, but I know that's now an option that we're going to be able to do if they don't use this for educational expenses, which I love. Next, we wanted to be able to gift each of our children $150,000 towards a house down payment. Now, this may not all go towards a down payment. There may be costs with moving, there may be costs with getting new furniture for a new place, there may be costs with repairs and things when you first move in. Like, for example, we've already put $20,000 into our house and we've only been here 4 months, and it was like move-in ready. There were just things that broke that needed to be addressed when we first moved in that we didn't necessarily expect to break right away. So buying a house is stressful enough. Coming up with a down payment is stressful enough. I'd really love to be able to give each of our kids a head start in that process and gift them a large down payment when they are ready to buy their first home. Not only does it help them get in the door, but a bigger down payment will mean their mortgage is smaller, so their monthly expenses are easier to handle when they're in the early stages of their career and not earning as much. And I would just be so grateful to be able to do this for them. And finally, we want to set aside at least $75,000 for a wedding for each of our kids. Again, this is like aspirational. This is not necessarily what we'll be able to reach, but I figured I'd rather shoot a little bigger for these things, and if we come up short, we come up short, but at least set those high goals, because I'd really love to be able to gift them a wedding and a nice honeymoon, and $75,000 I feel like would be a good amount to cover that. Now, I realize that not everyone gets married, not everyone wants to buy a home, so these funds may get allocated in different ways for them based on who they grow to be as people, but these are funds that we'd still love to have like set aside, earmarked for them to help them in big ways as they are starting out in their adult lives. So that's how we got to the $375,000 number for each of our kids. So we have 2 kids, and so if we adjust up for inflation, that would be an additional $2 million that we would need saved, invested for us to be able to help them out in that way. So if you add 5 million and 2 million, that gets us to 7 million. The additional $3 million, I don't have as much of a concrete explanation for. My husband and I just kind of went by like the feel of what we thought would be nice to have. So if we're able to invest more, or if we hit our 5 million or our $7 million goal and we both are enjoying working still, then at that point we can still continue investing and accumulate additional funds up to around $10 million, as I think would like maximize everything we would ever want to do in life. And so what would we want to do with an additional $3 million in retirement? Now, when I calculated that $5 million number, that's based on how we live our life today. Today, we don't go out to dinner regularly. We don't travel regularly. We don't contribute to charity in a large way on a regular basis. We aren't able to do a lot of the things that I think we would really enjoy when we have more time freedom in the later years of our life. The other thing that's not included in this calculation is increased medical expenses. This is a huge one and is always on my mind because of my experience as an estate planning attorney. As some of you may know, I used to work as an estate planning attorney. I don't anymore. I'm home with my kids. But the years of experience working with people at retirement age and beyond really opened my eyes as to how expensive it can be to get older in terms of medical costs. So in order to account for the potential of very expensive medical needs at the end of our life, we wanted to add additional funds on top of our like minimum kind of bare bones budget that we're living on now, where we're in a time in our life when we don't have excessive medical expenses. There are some medical expenses built into our budget, but not really excessive like large medical expenses. And then finally, it would be nice to have something left over to leave for our kids. I know I talked about having $1 million for each of them to gift during lifetime, but it would also be nice to have something left over after we've enjoyed our lives fully to leave them to pass on to future generations. So if we break that $3 million up into different categories, I would say the first million would be for like enjoying life, traveling, restaurants, charity, like things like of that nature. The second million, I would say, would be for medical costs in retirement. And then the third million would be to leave something extra for an inheritance for our kids after we pass away. So this is how we thought about it to get to our $5 to $10 million number. Obviously, this isn't an exact science. Like nobody knows how long they're gonna live, how much it's gonna cost when they retire, what their expenses will be, what their life will look like in 10, 20, 30 years. But we went through this exercise to do our best to estimate what we thought we would want to have in the future so we can take action today to make that happen. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have come up with your FIRE number, comment below, let me know what it is, and if there were any other factors in the calculation that you included, because again, I am not an expert in this. This is just an idea I came up with and the way my brain works when I think about it. So there may be things that you thought of to include in this calculation that I didn't, so comment below and let me know. Obviously, taxes can be a big part of this, so whether your investments are pre-tax or after-tax, that would have to be accounted for, but I'm not getting quite into that nitty-gritty yet. I think as we get further down the road to retirement, we will start thinking about those things and maybe even hire a professional to help us work through some of those numbers. But another thing to think about that I didn't include in this calculation when I'm doing just like rough estimates. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, and if you want to see more from me, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.